Enter to win a new Surfskate every month at surfskate.love/giveaway. This is the longboard that started this whole longboard obsession for me, the Envy Classic. It's 57 inches long, 11.5 inches wide, and has a 38-inch wheelbase. My friend had an old one in his garage, and I threw a Waterborne surf adapter on it and instantly fell in love. But I gave it back to my friend, and I've been looking for another one ever since. I recently found this one on eBay for a steal of a deal, so I'm stoked to put this thing together and add it to my collection again. So since I've already built this one, I already know what I'm going to use on this build, which is a Waterborne surf and rail adapter with traditional kingpin trucks as opposed to reverse kingpin trucks. That makes it more nimble than RKP's, but it is going to create a challenge for us that I'll talk about. On these longboards, I've found that the rail adapter is absolutely essential because what it does is to help keep your back wheels on the ground. So you can see on these longboards how if I'm pushing down in the middle, that's going to be pushing those wheels up off of the ground. So rail adapter is absolutely essential. And I've already used these, so I've already switched out the bushings on these. All the Waterborne stuff comes with bushings in 85A standard durometer, and that's a little bit too soft for my weight, so I've upgraded these all to Riptide bushings in 87.5A. And I've also already replaced the surf adapter bushing in here as well because that's a little bit soft for my weight, so I go a little bit harder on that with the Riptide bushing as well. Now when it comes to wheels on this build, I have a challenge, which is that I already know from experience that when I'm using the Waterborne with TKPs on 70mm wheels, I am going to get wheel bite. So I have a decision. I could go with smaller wheels, or there are a number of other things I could do to eliminate wheel bite. I could use risers, but personally, these are my favorite wheels for these longboards. I like the bigger and softer because I travel long distances and I want a lot of grip on rough surfaces. So what we're going to do is use a router and an angle grinder to cut out wheel wells on both the front and the back of this thing, which will eliminate wheel bite, and that'll allow us to use these 70mm wheels. And then I'm using my favorite bearings of all time, G-bomb bearings. Now, before we cut out our wheel well holes, I need to attach the surf and rail adapters to see where they're hitting on the board. So the first thing I'm going to do is install the surf adapter. And to do that, I'm going to take this apart. I found that it's a lot easier to work with the surf adapter when you just take it apart. So I'm going to just take this off of here. And you'll notice that the surf adapter has two sets of washers and bearings. One of them is this set up here, and then the other one is down here. And to get these out, I just use a little screwdriver like this to fish them out. Like so. And now we're ready to install our top base plate of the surf adapter. Okay, I just realized that we have a problem, which is that these bolt holes are drilled in an old school bolt pattern, which is wider than new school. And these pre-threaded holes come in the new school pattern. So that means that we're not going to be able to use these pre-threaded holes. We're going to have to use longer bolts so that we have nuts on this side, because we're going to have to use these up here to meet this old school bolt pattern. So I had 1-inch screws in there, so now I think that 1 1/4 should do the trick. And I will also need nuts as well. Now before I put this on, just a quick note on this is that I do have the option to just drill new holes, but I just don't feel inclined to do that on this deck. I'm just going to go ahead and use the nuts. So now we'll just put all this back together, first with our washers and bearings, and now this other base plate comes on. And you want to make sure that you don't get that too tight. You also want to make sure that it's not too loose so that there's no play, and I think we got that just about perfect. Okay, now time for our rail adapter, and same thing. The easiest way to do it is just to take this all apart. And another thing I love about the new updated rail adapter is that the old rail adapter used to make contact with the kingpins, metal on metal contact, and that would cause a rattle. But they fixed that by putting these little plastic washers between your base plate and your kingpin, which now eliminates that rattle, which I really love. All right, so now we want to make sure that we're installing this properly. We want to have, of course, pivot cups facing back, facing out. And you'll notice that on these rail adapters, they have these notches here. And if you put this rail adapter with those notches aligned, what it will do is it'll align these nuts with these nuts protruding, and if they're too long, when that rail adapter goes back and forth like that, they can make contact with each other. So the ideal way to install your rail adapter is with those reversed like this, and that offsets those, so now you don't have that risk of those nuts knocking against each other when the rail adapter goes back and forth like that. So that means that if we're going to install this pivot cups out like this, that means that this piece is going to go on like this with these notches back like that. All right, now let's get wheels on so we can see where those Wheelbite marks are going to hit on both the front and the rear. Alright, so let's take a look here. On our front, you see where that Wheelbite mark is hitting? About right there. And this side is about right here, like so. And on the rear, this is gonna hit right in here, about like so. And on this side, about like so. So now that we've just put all this together, now we're going to take it all apart to cut out these wheel wells. So I'm going to just draw these out now how I want them, and I want to keep this as clean and minimalistic as possible, and I want it to try to look as good as possible. So I'm going to just draw out my shape that I'm going to cut with my router. So I think about something like this will look pretty good. And now the trick is to get it as symmetrical as possible on both sides. So I think about something like this, and we will just do our absolute best here to make these as clean and pretty as possible. And then on these rear ones, I want to do something about like so, I think. All right, so here we are out in the garage, and I'm going to use a router for these front ones and an angle grinder for these rear ones. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to pick my router bit, and I'm going to use this small one here. And now I want to set my depth, and I'm going to use these existing wheel wells as my marks. So I'm going to just go as deep as those are. I think that should do it right there. All right, so here's our first one, and I'm trying to keep these as minimal as possible, and so I'll try to get the second one to match here. So that's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and I think that'll work for me. All right, now let's work on these rear ones, and for this, I'm using an angle grinder. All right, so these are pretty rough, but now I can smooth them out with some sandpaper. All right, so now these are nice and smooth, and I think what I'll do is try to paint these white too, to make it blend in with the board, make it look more natural. But they're looking a lot better than my previous attempts because I have the right tools, so I'm pretty pleased with these. So with our wheel wells cut out, we're ready to start assembling this thing. I'm going to start with this top base plate of the surf adapter, just like we did before. So let's take a look at these wheel wells now and see how those are looking. Oh, you know what? I think I actually want to extend that one out a little bit. Let's look at this one. Those both could probably be extended just a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and I think it'll be fine for now. We're getting the spots, and I think that that's going to prevent wheel bite anyway. I think we're fine. Let's take a look at these on the rear. And I found that you can't really completely eliminate wheel bite on the rail adapter on the rear, but it's highly unlikely that you're going to be hitting that. I think this is ready to go out and test ride. Let's take her out and see how she rides. Actually, before we get this out for a ride, there's one last thing I want to do to this, and I should have remembered this from my experience with it before, but I actually want to de-wedge this, and I'll show you why. When I stand on this, this is a very, very flexy board, and you'll see just how much that flexes. That's going to change the angle of this surf adapter, and so now instead of it rotating like this, it's going to tilt it up a little bit more like this, and it'll be rotating like this. And so if I de-wedge that, that's going to make that angle straight. So I'm thinking maybe just a 2 to 3 degree wedge riser, and we'll de-wedge that and straighten that up from the flex. All right, so let's get this de-wedged, and I'm going to start with just a 2 degree riser and see what that does for me. We'll start small, and if we want more, we can add more. Let's take a look at this now and see how that de-wedge will kind of help us with that angle a little bit.